Hello, everyone. I'm ZHAO Chuang. Today, let's get to know Essien the Spinosaurus. The Spinosaurus was a very famous dinosaur. The reconstruction of this dinosaur had twists and turns in the history of dinosaur reconstruction or research. When the Spinosaurus was first discovered, it was reconstructed as a large carnivorous dinosaur that looked similar to the Tyrannosaurus rex. Unfortunately, at the end of World War II, the specimen and the museum were blown up, so its exact appearance has been a mystery for a long time. When people first discovered the Spinosaurus, they noticed several features. Its legs looked relatively short, and it had a huge back sail, but the shape of the back sail remained a mystery due to the incomplete fossils. Another feature is that it had a structure protruding upward at the front of the lower jaw. However, due to the lack of skull fossils, in the early years, people reconstructed it a T-Rex-like skull, and a bit like that of Dimetrodon, in the Permian period. At the time, the shape of its tail was completely unknown, neither was the shape of its forelimbs. So when I was a child, I used to see the Spinosaurus forelimbs quite a lot. Sometimes they were reconstructed to look like those of Ceratosaurus, a short hand with 4 fingers. Let's take a look at this model of Essien the Spinosaurus. The head of Spinosaurus we see now is a result of all the researches in the past century. This reconstruction may be very accurate, because a large number of skull specimens discovered later, although not a single intact one. These fragments indicated that its overall appearance was probably like this. Its face was rather long. Probably as earliest as in the 1970s or 1980s, some people associated it with Baryonyx, and speculated that this dinosaur might be closely related to Baryonyx. Therefore, Baryonyx was later classified into the Spinosauridae. The entire head of Spinosaurus was shaped and reconstructed based on Baryonyx, with a long face. But it's not until now that we know the exact shape. Its face was very different from that of Baryonyx. The back of its head was sloping downward, and its eyes were more suited for aquatic life than Baryonyx. Although the latest research suggested that Baryonyx also preferred to swim in the water, bone density indicated that Spinosaurus spent more time in the water than Baryonyx, so its facial structure was more like that of aquatic animals. Its eyes were located at the highest point, so were its nostrils. Its ears weren't found in fossils, but we speculate that its ears may have evolved to be similar to those of crocodiles. The narrow horizontal slits behind the eyes were where the ears were located. When it surfaced, it could ensure that the 3 sense organs, namely the nose, the eyes, and the ears were exposed, which would also help it breathe. When people first discovered fossils of Spinosaurus, they realized that there was a structure protruding upward at the front of the lower jaw. But if you look at the early reconstructions, including the earliest research, you will find that although they noticed this structure and drew it on the lower jaw, it wasn't reflected in the appearance. That is to say, when people made the reconstructions, they treated Spinosaurus just like any other dinosaur. One reason might be that the early drawings were rather sketchy, and people neglected this detail. The other reason might be that the dinosaurs at the time were reconstructed based on lizards, and many dinosaurs' faces were made resemble those of lizards with large scales, as well as lizard-like lips, nostrils, and eyes. Therefore, when people were reconstructing the Spinosaurus at that time, considering that the structure of its mouth was also reflected in some monitor lizards, they probably thought its mouth was the same as that of monitor lizards. Although the hook-like structure was shown on the skull, it couldn't be seen from the appearance. We now know that Spinosaurus had a notch at the front of its upper jaw, and a corresponding bulge on its lower jaw. When it closed its mouth, the 2 structures fit perfectly, forming a pincer-like structure, an arc that gave it greater grasping ability, which was an adaptation to its fishing habits. Looking back at many animals in history, those with fishing habits would normally evolve such a structure. Many species of crocodilians have a similar structure. In the Triassic period, there was an aquatic reptile called Chasmatosarcus, which also had a similar mouth structure. In addition, Dilophosaurus had a similar structure at the front of the mouth as well. And in the stomach of Dilophosaurus, scales of at least 2 or 3 sharks were found. This might be an example of convergent evolution for fishing. What's more, there was a crest-like structure atop its head, which might be used for intraspecies recognition. It seemed to be brightly colored. When we designed the color for it, we painted it red. If you look at it from the front, you will find that it's shaped like a long shark fin, which might help it navigate or maintain balance in the water. Although the snout tip of the Spinosaurus was slender, it became wider toward its cheeks, because this part contained a lot of strong muscles. If a living Spinosaurus opened its mouth, you would have seen powerful muscles on both sides. When viewed from the front, its face became broader toward the rear. It indicates that this animal was ferocious with a lethal bite. Apart from fishing, Spinosaurus might have hunted other contemporary marine creatures such as pliosaurs and plesiosaurs. It could also prey on some herbivorous dinosaurs on land. And Spinosaurus had a long and flexible neck. Fossils show that the cervical vertebrae in the neck could form an S shape, or were capable of a wide swinging from left to right, as shown in this model. It could turn its head wide from left to right. Although the neck was relatively long, it was not thin. Analysis of the locations of the muscle attachments indicated that the muscles around the neck were actually thick and robust. The muscles attached to both ends of the neck, one below its head, the other above its rib cage, were also very sturdy. Therefore, the neck itself might be very muscular, similar to that of modern crocodiles. Regarding the Spinosaurus forelimbs, fossils are scarce and incomplete, but they still indicate that it was an animal with very developed forelimbs. Its front claws were very large in proportion. There is no complete fossil of the hand at present. Only the first finger was relatively intact, the other 2 fingers only had fragmentary phalanges. Therefore, people speculate that its third finger was probably very long. Some specimens indicated that its third finger was very long, but the authenticity of these specimens was questionable. The first so-called intact fossil of the Spinosaurus forelimb indicated that it had a very long third finger. However, the fossils of Spinosaurus were excavated in Africa, and there were many so-called intact forelimb fossils for sale in local areas. Therefore, most of the so-called intact fossils of the forelimbs are fake, and cannot be used as scientific evidence. The current view we adopted in the reconstruction is still from the public official article of Spinosaurus, which restored the forelimbs based on the fragments. Since the third finger shown in previous fossil fragments was relatively thin and fragile, so in many papers, the third finger was depicted to be very short, and our reconstruction is based on this view. The nail of the third finger was also found, which was very small. Its first finger had a very large claw, similar to that of Baryonyx. However, unlike the curved claw of Baryonyx, Spinosaurus had its claw relatively flat. Therefore, some people think that the relatively flat claws were a structure that evolved to prevent wear and tear, when Spinosaurus used its strong forelimbs to assist quadruped walking. We did not take this point of view. When reconstructing the quadrupedal walking posture, we adopted similar locomotion to that of sloths or ground sloths, or some species of the Ancylopoda, so that its claws were curved backward. So far, for most dinosaurs, including the Spinosaurus, there's no clear evidence that indicates their phalanges could bend forward like many animals today, such as cats. In addition, the claws of Ancylodherium from the Ancylopoda could also bend forward, but there was a specialized knuckle that allowed it to bend upwards. No such pulley-like knuckles were found in the Spinosaurus fossils, so we adopted the locomotion of gorillas or Meropus and shaped them like this. When Spinosaurus had its fingers together to form a fist naturally and touched the ground, these three nails would bend diagonally backward. When it closed its hand, this relatively flat arc would fit with the structure of its wrist. Therefore, we think this reconstruction may be close to the original. Its shape fits with the outline of the inside of the arm. Assuming that its forelimbs could assist in standing, it's worth noting that in many reconstructions, the fingertip was often made to bear weight, but it actually couldn't bear any weight. In our reconstruction, the metacarpus was used to bear weight when the fingers bent. The fingers of Spinosaurus looked relatively fragile and couldn't function like those of gorillas and humans, because we can use our thumbs to bear weight. Spinosaurus obviously couldn't do this. Therefore, in our reconstruction, its fingers, especially the second and third fingers, bent completely, and it used the palm, this section, to bear weight. For such a heavy animal, this may be a reasonable reconstruction. Now, let's move on to its body structure. Currently known fossil evidence shows that its chest appeared to be wide, and its pelvis narrow. Its entire trunk was cylindrical, but flat like that of a crocodile. Its ribs weren't long, but when the two ends of its ribs met the spine, you will find that they would bend upward, whereas the ribs of most dinosaurs would bend downward. Therefore, the two upward bending ends formed a relatively flat body shape. When taking the abdominal ribs beneath into account, the abdominal ribs and the dorsal ribs would form an oblate lantern-like shape, which was also what its trunk looked like in our reconstruction. Next, let's talk about its legs. Spinosaurus had relatively short legs, which was noticed when people first discovered their fossils. If you look at the earliest skeletal sketches of Spinosaurus, you would find that the legs of Spinosaurus, drawn then, were already very short. Then, for a certain period, the legs of Spinosaurus were restored very long, and they could run on land. During that period, people might be misled by the long legs of baryonyx. But later, re-examination and evidence from new fossils confirmed that the Spinosaurus legs were actually very short. Its feet were also unusual. Although it had 4 toes like other carnivorous dinosaurs, all 4 toes were very likely to touch the ground when walking. This is what a typical Spinosaurus looked like when it was walking with 4 toes. Its big toe was also on the ground, and the other 3 toes were connected by short webs, allowing it to paddle in the water. In addition, the toenails of Spinosaurus were relatively flat and blunt. The part underneath the toenails was flat, and the entire foot was flat like that of ducks, which means that it didn't run on land very often, but was more suited to swimming in water. The sole of its foot was based on a current specimen that was said to be the footprint of Spinosaurus. The footprint fossil was also quite consistent with the anatomy of the Spinosaurus foot. Therefore, we believe that this may be the correct description, and adopted the structure of that foot when making the reconstruction. An important discovery of the tail of Spinosaurus has only been found in recent years. Its tail appeared shorter than previously thought, with longer neural spines. The neural spines were also discovered in some early Spinosaurus specimens. The neural spine was a rod-shaped structure like a chopstick, which was long and slender, pointing backward. But back then, it was impossible to confirm where this long neural spine was located on its tail, and there were only a few bones. No one knew if the neural spines behind were also as long as this. Therefore, early reconstructions were rather conservative, and not like our reconstruction. But later, a complete Spinosaurus tail was unearthed, and we finally got to know that its tail was like this, especially the neural spines at the rear of its tail became extra long, forming a large rudder like that of crocodiles, or a paddle resembling a caudal fin. But the Spinosaurus tail wasn't flexible, because its neural spines all pointed backward like this. This means when the neural spines were covered with skin, they couldn't swing from side to side freely, which made the tail tip rigid. Therefore, when we design a movement for the tail, and want to make it bend, we must make the tail swing to one side, and then change the left-right locomotion into up and down locomotion, allowing the distance the neural spines to vary, so that the tail looked like blooming when viewed from the side. This locomotion may be easier for Spinosaurus to do. Now we move on to its tail muscles. Although fossils indicate that the neural spines, from the base to the tip of the tail, were all very long, those at the base had a large and wide section at their lower parts. This wide section corresponded to the position where the muscles attached to the tail above. Therefore, most neural spines at the base of the tail were covered by muscles. Then the muscles tapered toward the tail tip to expose more neural spines. In other words, the neural spines were partially exposed at the base of the tail, more exposed toward the tail tip, and finally became flat plate-shaped at the tip. Lastly, let's talk about its iconic structure, the back sail. The Spinosaurus back sail has long been under debate. According to some radical views, its back sail might be completely covered with muscles, or with fat like a camel's hump. Firstly, such a structure was too heavy, so we didn't adopt this structure. Secondly, if you carefully observe the structure of the Spinosaurus neural spines, you will find that most neural spines weren't suitable for muscle attachments, because they were quite smooth, and that there weren't muscle attachment sites underneath. In many reconstructions, the neural spines were made covered by muscles because they compared them with those of many modern ungulates, such as bison or rhinoceroses. These animals also have long neural spines, but they are essentially different from those of Spinosaurus. First of all, the scapula of rhinos or bovids is very large, which levels in height with the tips of the neural spines, and the depression in the middle can accommodate muscles. And there are rough concave traces on the side of the neural spines of bovids, which can accommodate muscles, and these muscles would connect to the scapula. As far as we know, the Spinosaurus scapula was underdeveloped. Neither the scapula nor the pelvis had muscle attachment sites, so they wouldn't have thick muscles. So it's more likely that most parts of the back sail remained a simple back sail structure as seen in some modern lizards, such as sailfin lizards or chameleons. One of its functions may be for display, so we used brighter colors for it. The other function might be to keep balance during swimming in water, acting like the dorsal fin of sailfish. The sailfish dorsal fin is also quite bright. When it comes to muscle attachments, the dorsal neural spines weren't completely incapable of attaching muscles. If you observe this neural spine, it was like a vase, with a narrow upper part and a broad lower part, which was very likely to be used for muscle attachments, as shown in this section of the model. Therefore, in our reconstruction, the Longissimus dorsi covered all the way until here. The arc formed here was just as high as the pelvis and the scapula. Therefore, this bulging section at the base of the neural spines formed an area with the pelvis and the scapula, which could accommodate muscles. This is how we reconstructed it. When viewed from the front, its entire back was round, and connected to the wider section at the base of the neural spines, with the top parts exposed to form the back sail. Good, the above concludes our introduction to Essien the Spinosaurus.